Hello, I'm Terry David Mulligan. This is the Mulligan Stew podcast. We're going to go back to, I was looking at some of the podcasts that we had done previously. Kids in the Hall, Kebmo, Where's My Roy Cone? But this one jumped out at me. Let me take you back to January the 14th of 2022, episode 191 of the Mulligan Stew podcast. Chief Clarence Louie and his book, Res Rules. At the age of 24, 1984, Clarence Louie was elected chief of the Osoyoos Indian Band and has been there for 38 years, approaching 40 years. When he was first elected chief, the reservation, the nation was in tough shape. No economy, no nothing. But Clarence Louie had educated himself on Native American studies at the Saskatchewan Federation Indian College. He studied Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, Chief Joseph. He learned all about the treaties that were signed and then broken. His book is called Res Rules, My Indictment of Canada's and America's Systematic Racism Against Indigenous People. It does cover all of those subjects just mentioned, but much more. For example, the naming of sports teams. For example, the Cleveland Indians or the Washington Redskins. As Chief Clarence says, I'm an Indian. I'm a Redskin. I have no problem with that. Chicago Blackhawks. He loves them. In this book, Chief Louie takes aim at the systematic racism and examines the relationship between First Nations and colonial Canada and the United States, because the band didn't just exist in Osoyoos. The band in the nation and their territory 10,000 years ago went across that 49th parallel and well into Washington State. He is an amazing man, and he's very outspoken. He is going to bend some noses in this podcast. He's going to have some voices barking back at him, but he's been doing it for years. He knows what he's talking about. He does hundreds of speeches during the course of the year, and this is basically what you're going to hear in this over 45 minute conversation that I had with Chief Clarence Louie, the Osoyoos Indian Band. But he does chart, as much as he talks about racism, he does really go straight at Indian leadership. And he quotes Ovid Mercredi, the past national Indian chief. As a chief, it's the economic horse that pulls the social cart. You're either dependent, someone else feeds you, or independent, feed yourself. You can't call yourself a warrior if you're sitting on a couch. There's lots of stuff going on in here. Have a listen to an amazing individual and a born leader, Chief Clarence Louie. For almost 40 years, the chief of the incredibly successful Osoyoos Indian Band. Chief Clarence Louie is a member of the Order of British Columbia and the Order of Canada. And this is what he's accomplished in the 38 years. The Osoyoos Indian Band leases their vineyards to Jackson Triggs, Spirit Ridge Resort, Sonora Dunes Golf Course, the new District Wine Village, a newly opened provincial prison, and 1,100 acres of prime vineyards. They own their own 300-acre vineyard, Incomeep Cellars, their cultural center, the campground RV park, daycare, gas stations, cannabis stores, and it goes on and on and on. Clarence Louie decided as chief that he was going to put the band in business, and business he did. Chief Clarence will spend considerable minutes talking about reconciliation, about the Indian residential school system, the tragedy that happened in Kamloops and across the nation. He'll talk about the Indian problem, and best of all, he'll talk about Wounded Knee, Little Bighorn, Crazy Horse, Sitting Bull, and the fact that he is damn lucky to be an Indian. Here's Chief Clarence Louie.
Can you see me?
I can see you.
You see my Redskin helmet behind me?
I don't have to see anybody else. All right, you got a Redskin helmet. What else you got?
I'm a Habs fan, of course.
Of course.
And I got my book right there.
Here's what I got. This is the galley. All right, it's like a.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's a tougher read in bed, but it's still okay. It's a great read.
Well, I want to send you one of my books. You'll have to send me your address.
I will do that.
If you're a legend, I got to get you to send you a book then.
This is fantastic, Chief. I just
you got the title of my book, right?
Yep. Res Rules. You can hold
that. You got the backs.
Yep.
Back symbolism.
Got the symbolism.
Do you know what the symbolism stands for?
The $5 bill.
Okay, let's start up here.
Okay.
Do you know what that is?
Oh, so hold on a second. So I haven't seen that. I don't have that here. What the hell is
That's a beaver pelt.
Oh, man.
And the symbolism behind that is the first relationship First Nations had, whether it's East Coast, West Coast,
Yep.
with non-natives was based on business and commerce.
Yeah.
Then it was called the fur trade. Hudson Bay Company built forts in my territory here. And my great-great-grandfather's dad was an Iroquois because he came over, whether it was Mohawk or whatever, from southern. He came over with the fur trade with Hudson Bay Company.
Okay.
So our first relationship with white people was based on business. Of course, the Crown has never done shit for Native people. It's like it's a phony institution.
Yep.
Which costs billions of dollars.
And lives.
Exactly. In the $5 bill, if you can believe this, every summer, the federal government sends out a bureaucrat dressed up, suit and tie, carrying a briefcase full of crisp $5 bills to the signed treaty numbers. And the RCMP and their Red Surge show up on these Indian reserves, and they still hand out $5 bills because that's what the treaty said, say in 1870. And I just laugh at that. I'm thinking reconciliation is also an accounting word, right?
Yeah.
Accountants use that. Within 5 minutes, I can take my calculator and figure out a $5 bill in 1870 is not a $5 bill in 2021. Why can't the Canadian government give out its treaty obligations, reconcile them to today's value?
Yeah.
Indians shouldn't have to be lining up to get $5 bills. That's just so stupid and embarrassing. For the average Canadian, it should be embarrassing.
Okay, here's what but I got to introduce you. For God's sake, let me introduce you. Chief Clarence Louie. He's the chief for 38 years of the Osoyoos Indian Band, OIB. And he's written a book called Res Rules. It's about leadership. It's about Indian leaders, holding them accountable. And you wrote this book for your sons and daughters and their sons and daughters for all those tomorrows ahead. You wanted to get the record straight. A lot of them are going to be pissed off because you're actually holding them up for the good things that they've done and the bad things that they've done. And basically, it's your whole life, how you taught yourself, how you learned to run this road, this red road. And it's all laid out in the pages. It's fantastic.
Thanks, Terry. And of course, when you talk about the red road, the only time I really hear that term is when one of my people are graduating from a treatment center. They've had addictions problems,
yep.
Usually alcohol, but now drugs. But you go to all these treatment centers, especially Native treatment centers. They talk about the red road, get back on the red road. Well, in my opinion, the red road is a working road. Our ancestors didn't sit on their asses with their hands out,
yep.
and expect somebody else to feed them, clothe them, or shelter them. Every tribal nation couldn't go down to the Safeway and buy groceries. You had to get your ass up and get out there and hunt and fish.
Yep.
And there's no flicking a switch like nowadays. Even I grew up where, man, if you didn't get up and chop that kindling and chop that wood, you froze. You'd get your ass up out of bed early because you were cold. You'd go out there and chop wood in the deep snow and build a fire. So our ancestors worked for a living. I don't care what tribe, but what nation it was. There was no such thing as welfare. There was no such thing as somebody building your house. You built your own house. So that to me is the working culture that every First Nation came from.
You say in the book, I set out to write this book. I really want our people to act and live like hardworking people, like our ancestors did. But to be independent, to be self-supporting. This book is a first step.
True that. Once you get over 50, and Terry, I think you're over 50. You're a living legend. So in any case, once you get over 50, in my opinion, you're in your last quarter. I'm in my last quarter.
Yeah. Whether
I admit it or not. And some people like you can actually get into overtime. I don't know if I'll ever get into overtime.
Yeah, you will.
But I know I'm in my last quarter. So it was either now or never to write a book. And I've been asked to write a book for probably a good decade, 15, 20 years. And I love reading. I have an awesome book collection. And most of my learning, or at least half of my learning, has come from books. And that's why there's a lot of quotes in my book. I love quotes. I've seen it happen many, many times where one sentence, one quote from somebody, it doesn't matter if they're famous or not, one quote will stay with you for the rest of your life and guide you for the rest of your life.
I looked at those quotes and I started to take them onto myself as well. Gilbert Oscabus, who said it was one of those writers, those authors that you quote. He's talking about no messing around. We all fly with the eagles and beat with the same heartbeat bullshit. And then I highlighted a canoe of fools. There's some people that buy it and some people don't. I mean, what you're basically saying, this is paraphrasing, which is dangerous, but you're saying some of you are living in a dream world and you're being handed money. This is the real world over here. This is where people work and make a life for themselves and have pride. Make your decision as to what you're going to do. And I'll tell you which way to go. It's this way. Work your ass off.
True that. I mean, the First Nation experience in this country is bad. And whether you're black, white, yellow, or red, every society is based on work.
Yeah.
Sure. If you go back to that island called Britain, it did a lot of dumb shit.
Yeah.
My Scottish buddies tell me how bad their ancestors had it with the English, and the Irish as well against the English. So all races of people fought with each other. Sure, there were tribal wars, like the Okanagans fought with the Shuswaps, the Lakotas fought with the Crows, etc., etc. All races of people have done bad shit to each other. We all have.
Yeah.
But the point being is that every society that's successful or that endured comes from a working culture. We all had to work for a living. And it's too bad that the countries of Canada and the US, which colonized my people, the Okanagan people, because we're a cross-border tribe.
Sure. When
the Americans and the British arbitrarily chose the 49th parallel as the dividing line, they cut my people in half, in my traditional territory in half. So half of my people ended up on 7 reserves, Indian reserves in Canada, and 1 reservation, Indian reservation in the US. Both systems are the same. In Canada, they have Indian reserves, US has Indian reservations. In the US, they had boarding schools. Canada followed suit with residential schools. In the US, they have this department, which still exists, Bureau of Indian Affairs, BIA. Indians call it Boss Indians Around. In Canada, they used to have the Department of Indian Affairs, DIA.
Yeah.
They've changed their name to Indigenous Services Canada. To me, it's still the Department of Indian Affairs.
Doesn't matter what it is. Well, it doesn't matter what you call it.
Exactly. It's the same system.
Yeah.
Same genocidal, cultural. And in Canada, I was on a Trudeau Foundation. I sat in Quebec not long ago with microphones on my head, because the French people would stand up and speak about how proud they are of their language and how they had to force Canada to incorporate French in everything, whether it's set on the planes, it's on cereal boxes, it's everywhere. And they were talking about how Canada owes French language so much. And I sat there biting my tongue and thought, what about the First Nation languages? Aren't they as important as the French? Isn't the First Nation language as important as the English? Fact is, the First Nation languages are the original language of this land, not English or French.
Yeah. Indian magic. You're talking about Indian magic. I love the phrase. Indian magic turned the res into a stronghold. It helped in some ways to protect Native culture and identity, and the res system to keep Native people on the land. That's what they were doing. They were trying to take their land, but you go over there. And basically, what you're saying with Indian magic comes back again to land ownership. Give our land back. The land that you stole from us, give it back.
Exactly. I mean, of course, I full well understand we're not going to get all of our land back.
Yeah.
Private property is always off the table. But what bugs me is the term reconciliation. Every premier uses that now. Every prime minister uses that now. Everybody in government uses truth and reconciliation. I want to throw those words back at every government official. Okay, let's start with the truth. Let's start with the truth of how Canada and America were founded. They were founded on a bunch of imperialistic lies, which did not include, in the old documents, even still today, the Declaration of Independence uses that term, savages. The original sin, and it's funny how I watch CNN and I hear this all the time, even last week. The original sin in America was slavery. No, it wasn't. No. The original sin was when the Christians came over here and broke their own 10 commandments. I assume these 10 commandments are supposed to be a core principle of the Bible. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not lie. Thou shalt not covet their neighbor's home. That was our land. That home, that house was our land. And where the government here in BC holds on to old Indian Reserve properties like Osoyoos that they took away in 1915 in OK Falls, they took that away with a swipe of a pen. I'm telling government, give back our old reserves, which you still control, with a swipe of a pen. That's how you reconcile. Reconciliation has to be put into action, not just nice words.
In our lifetime would be good.
Exactly. In our lifetime. Our people should not have to grow old at the negotiating table. And because the province and the feds have so much more money than we do, they just delay, and our people have grown old trying to get justice in this country.
Chief Clarence Louie, he's the chief for 38 years of the Osoyoos Indian Band, OIB. And he's written a book called Res Rules. It's about leadership. It's about Indian leaders, holding them accountable. Chief Clarence, listen, you say, and this is something that just struck me straight through my heart, if you're going to claim to be an Indian, do something Indian. You don't need to be elected chief to be a leader. And those are strong words, and I hope they hit.
Exactly. I've always told my people here, if you collect a paycheck, whether you're our education coordinator, social worker, every First Nation employs hundreds of people. And if you're collecting a paycheck on behalf of your First Nation, you're automatically leader. You're supposed to improve the lives of your people, not just yourself or your family, but your people. And these bureaucrats, they call them civil servants, whether in Department of Indian Affairs or whatever government, health, education. You're supposed to improve the lives of your clients, of your constituents. And if you're not doing that, you should get your ass fired.
Chief Clarence Louie, he's the chief for 38 years of the Osoyoos Indian Band. He's written a book called Res Rules. It's about leadership. It's about Indian leaders, holding them accountable. In chapter 4, which is called No More Broken Windows, I kind of wondered where you were going to go with this. Where is the leadership on the res? Where are the chiefs? Where are the people who are doing right by the people on that reservation? Because some of those reses are a mess. How do you change the leadership that isn't leading?
Well, it goes back, of course, in a democracy. Democracies aren't perfect, but they're still the best system of all of those others that have been tried before. And on Indian reserves, because our populations are so small, and because we're forgetting our traditional values of leadership.
Yeah.
And now anybody 18 and older thinks they're an instant leader. People vote for whoever hands out the most cookies or the most crumbs. And it's kind of bad that a lot of Indian reserves are electing people who just perpetuate poverty, and they just perpetuate the same old mob system, if you want to call it that. But more and more, the younger people I see on Indian reserves are coming up.
Come on, really?
And they're starting to, because of the internet and because of access to going to school and hearing stuff like your broadcast, for example, younger people are starting to say enough is enough. We're not going to vote for people who just keep this poverty going. I was on a Navajo res not long ago, and one of the pictures in my book, I had to put that picture in there because there's a sign that says to the Navajo people, the biggest res in the world, 300,000 members, 13 million acres or whatever it is, huge reservation. The sign says, vote for jobs. Vote for candidates that are going to produce jobs. not just talk.
I'm glad you're asking that question, Clarence. I really am. And I think that Native pride and ownership shows well on you. It's basically one of the keystones of what you believe in. And you talk about the Trail of Broken Treaties through your Native American studies, and you get to the Indian problem. Do you want to just explain to some of the audience, what is the Indian problem? It changes, but what is the Indian problem?
In the old documents, and those documents are there for anyone to read. In the old documents, the treaty documents, the land claim documents, the historical documents, whether it's John A. Macdonald or George Washington, they always talked about the Indian problem. There's an Indian problem out west. Yeah. And as George Washington once said, I only want two things from Indians. First is peace, second is their land.
Yeah.
And John A. Macdonald, when they were building that railroad, we got to deal with the Indians out west. We got an Indian problem. And of course, part of the government on both sides of the border, their solution to the Indian problem was, how do we get these Indians? We need this land. And as one Indian affairs official in the States once put it, it's easier to educate Indians than to kill them. It's more expensive to have wars with these Indians than to educate them and sign treaties with them, even though they broke every treaty. Let's put them in residential schools. We got to kill the Indian in the Indian. Save the man, but kill the Indian. That means get rid of our language, get rid of our culture, our ceremonies. One of the U.S. core principles was freedom of religion.
Yep.
But that freedom of religion didn't apply to the savages. Get rid of the Sundance, get rid of the potlatch, get rid of all of these Indian ceremonies. Only the Bible religion was important. So in any case, the Indian problem was perpetuated by government after government after government. Yeah, you have to remember, people don't realize that the last residential school shut down in my lifetime.
Yes.
I have people younger than me that went to residential school.
Yeah.
And those places were like close as you can come to Nazi concentration camps.
Chief Clarence Louie, he's the chief for 38 years of the Osoyoos Indian Band. He's written a book called Res Rules. It's about leadership. Here's what I wrote at about 3 o'clock in the morning when I was reading that chapter. Today we're challenging the historical myths of the USA and Canada. Page 99, my friends. The residential schools and boarding schools were the cruelest, most heartless federal government proposals ever conceived by the Americans and the Canadians in the name of justice and under the convenient cover of Christianity. The churches did the devil's work. The priests and nuns who abused innocent Native children should rot in hell.
True that. I mean, nothing upsets me more than when I talk about residential schools and I hear my own people's sad stories from childhood. Most of my people never had a childhood. They never had birthday parties. Yep. They never got presents. They never had a Christmas, if you want to say a Christmas. You know, it just baffles me how the Canadian flag and the American flag flew at those residential schools and boarding schools for over 100 years. And how the conservative governments, liberal governments kept them going decade after decade up until 1990. You know, and it makes me wonder, well, who's at fault here? Who elected those people? Somebody elected them. Who kept on electing these people that would take a segment of their population, First Nations people, take their kids away and send them away to be brainwashed, to be taken away from their family? And I hate hearing that term, sexual abuse. That's just a nicer way of saying rape. So many Native kids were raped in those schools. And now that the 215 were found in Kamloops, these unmarked graves, obviously criminal psychology and investigations have proven over and over again, if somebody would rape a child, they would also kill a child.
Yeah.
In my opinion, those unmarked grave sites at those residential schools should be crime scenes. And what would happen if two white kids were found, two unmarked white kids' graves were found?
Completely different.
It'd be called a crime scene. The RCMP would be all over it.
Yeah.
And to my knowledge, not one priest or nun has ever been charged with murder.
Yep.
From all those thousands of documented abuses of rape and violence and damage. Like some of my people came home with such physical damage that they limped for the rest of their life because he was thrown down the stairs, and he was busted up as a child and grown into adulthood. He couldn't walk properly anymore.
How will the residential story end, do you think?
Will the Holocaust story ever end?
No.
The fact is, the residential school story should never end, but Canada has to own up to its crimes.
Yep.
The church has to own up to its crimes. And it still baffles me that some First Nations want an apology from the Pope. To me, anytime you have to force somebody to apologize, is that really an apology?
Mm.
If you have to force somebody to apologize? I don't consider forced apologies sincere. In these records that they've been hiding, they're tampered records. You can't tell me. I mean, any criminologist would know this. Once you let the perpetrators keep all the records, and that maybe one of these days they're magically going to produce these records, they're going to be tampered records. I mean, give our heads a shake here. The church has lied and lied and lied throughout this 100 years of tormenting First Nations people. And when they do produce these records, they're going to be tampered records, tampered evidence. And the church is $1 billion industry.
Hmm.
I've actually been to Rome before. I've seen that $1 billion building. The Pope is, I mean, the Vatican is one of the most wealthiest places on this planet. Religion's a moneymaker.
Chief Clarence Louie of the Osoyoos Indian Band. He's written a book called Res Rules. Listen, this is not near as big as what you just talked about, but you did make reference behind you to the Washington Redskins helmet behind you, and you do a whole thing on Native names. And I love your, I love the way you laid it out. Reference to teams and symbols. I say it's a worthless gesture to try to knock them all down. The Edmonton Elks, for example. And we are talking with an Alberta audience. What did you think about the changing of names, like the Edmonton Elks, etc.?
Well, firstly, you have to remember with First Nations people, like any race of people, we don't all agree on everything.
Sure.
I don't know one Native family that agrees on everything, even brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers have differences with their kids and vice versa. When we have votes here on Osoyoos Indian Band project, sometimes my own mom, I'll vote no and I'll be voting yes. That's democracy.
Yeah.
And so my views on the Blackhawks or the Washington Redskins or the Kansas City Chiefs or the Edmonton Eskimos, I love the word Indian. Some of my people don't. They don't want to be called Indians anymore. Okay, well, go ahead. Well, I do. And the oldest person on this res, she's 90 some odd years old. She said, I was born an Indian, I'll die an Indian. So just to be clear, my opinion is not every First Nations opinion. And I support the Blackhawks logo. I support all these Native logos. Now, I wish they'd have kept the Redskins name and logo. There's nothing wrong with that logo. That Washington Redskins logo, just like the Blackhawks logo, it's one of the best logos in sports. And if you truly understand sports and you're a sports fan or you played the games, that logo's that's your team image. That's your identity. That's
your history. That's right.
That's what you go into battle with, whether it's on the ice or on the football field. There's nothing. A logo's in sports is at the utmost pride.
Yeah.
Utmost pride and usage. But what I do disagree with is when fans go there with phony headdresses or paint their faces, or that's crossing the line.
The tomahawk chop, yeah.
That's crossing the line. But the logo itself and the name itself, a team uses that in reverence, not in shame.
You have a phrase on the res that says hanging with the skins. That's what everybody's hanging with. Where are they? They're hanging with the skins, right? That's a phrase that you guys use.
I mean, I'm a redskin.
Yeah.
I got no problem with that.
Yeah.
When I was down in Australia, because one thing you find out, if you have a good relationship with the other races,
Yeah.
you say shit to each other you wouldn't say if you weren't buddies.
Yeah.
When I was down in Australia, I was out in the outback. In the Australia, the Aborigines would often tell me, "We black fellas, them white fellas," and I sat with them. The white fellas and the black fellas, they got along and they called each other. Like even in this office, if we hire a white person that's new, I don't talk to them the same way as I do somebody I've worked with for a long time. And Indians love to tease.
Yeah.
And so does every culture. So if this white woman, and this white woman here that's been with me for 30 some odd years, one of our best workers, and I love her dearly, I'll often pick up the phone and say, "Hey, white woman, come in here." And she'll say, "Hey, Indian, what do you want?" That's what we got to get down to. Today, people are too friggin' sensitive with Facebook, and everyone's a keyboard warrior. In our locker room, when we played hockey with the white boys, man, we teased each other left, right, and center. Hey, white kid, and hey, Indian, what do you want? That's what I want to get back to.
Okay.
We don't need to be so friggin' sensitive that we need to be politically correct. There's way too much of that.
I tell you who agrees with you is Buffy St. Marie. She says, "I'm an Indian. I want to be called an Indian." Okay.
Awesome. I didn't know that.
Oh,
Good.
yeah.
Good on her.
On this show, she said it. Call me an Indian.
You can call me a redskin.
Yep. Listen, there's a guy I want you to know about. I want you to check out his music. His name is, he's a James Bay Cree, Adrian Sutherland. He's an incredible singer-songwriter. And he was in James Bay, and he was in the middle of nowhere where he was living. But he's a musician, so he needed a studio. So he got a shipping container, and he turned it into a recording studio. And then he got a hold of Colin Linden in Nashville, a Canadian producer down there, great guy, but Blackie and the Rodeo Kings. And they hooked up, and he played and recorded in his shipping container in James Bay. And then they recorded the whole thing in Nashville and put it together into an album. It's fantastic.
And it's Adrian Sutherland.
Adrian Sutherland, first of all, you're gonna love him.
I just wrote down his name.
He is a natural leader, but man, is this album ever good. And out of a shipping container. That's what he did. That's how he got it done. He got it done. Another thing I want to just say, Tribe, you quoted this. Tribes have been hanging around the funding trough for far too long. I was taught by the old timers that there's no such thing as a free lunch. Indians got to stop looking for that free lunch.
True that. I mean, but you have to remember, from residential school, broken treaties, land rip-offs, like here at Osoyoos, we had 4,000 acres of our best bottomland taken. That's why our reserve now follows the rocks in the mountains.
Yeah.
If we hadn't had that 4,000 acres taken from us, we wouldn't have grown up in poverty. And you have to see that some of these bands across the country are getting $100 million land claims because the white settlers, and in the old documents, they actually said this: those Indians aren't doing anything with their land. We need it.
Yeah.
So the government would come in decades later sometimes and take away existing reserve land that the Indians had decided, like my grandfather said, our original boundary that our ancestors agreed on, yours and mine, was the Okanagan River. Indians on this side, whites on that side. But as more settlers came into every region of this country, Indian reserve lands was taken away, our best lands given to new settlers, and we were put on swamps, or we were put up against the rocks.
Yeah.
That's why so many Indian reserves still have boiled water advisories and don't have much economic opportunity, because their best lands that were set aside as reserve, as agreed upon by treaty or non-treaty. And that's why these land claims are coming up, where some bands, there's one in BC that's got over $100 million. But I hope they put that money to work. Go out. Land is more important than money. Go out and buy some economic development land next to highways. That's why urban reserves are being created on the prairies through treaty land and entitlement dollars, where bands are now creating urban reserves, and no Canadian, no mayor and council should be against urban reserves being created. What they should be against is having the youngest and fastest growing population in Canada, which is the Aboriginal people, First Nations people, being in poverty. Just like here in Osoyoos, I tease white guys I went to school with now because they're working on my res, whether it's at one of our businesses, at the provincial prison, or wherever. I said, I bet you never thought you'd be earning your paycheck, paying off your mortgage, paying off your car loan from working on the Osoyoos Indian Reserve. That's the original treaty relationship in action.
Chief Clarence Louie, chief for 38 years of the Osoyoos Indian Band, OIB. He's written a book called Res Rules. I won't keep you long, but let's do a speed round here, Clarence. Page 137, the OIB leases currently Arterra Winery, Jackson Triggs, a residential trailer park, 1,100 acres of premium vineyards, Area 27, one-of-a-kind high-end racetrack, provincial prison, Sonora Dunes Golf Course, Spirit Ridge, 4-star resort, 230 rooms, Tim Hortons gas station, District Wine Village, and Inkameep, an incredible winery. You've been saying the same thing for all along. The bottom line is do it yourself. Don't be taking handouts. Make your own coin. Make your own career. Get out there and do it the way it should be done, the way it was always done by your forefathers.
True that. I mean, we have to get back on our economic horse. And as one past national chief said, it's the economic horse that pulls the social cart. You can't put the cart before the horse. And that's what the federal government's doing, even in its $8 to $10 billion that it gives out in Indigenous programming. 95% of that is social spending. That's the wrong formula. I've been telling that to the federal government for decades. Yep. We need more economic development investment. Once you invest in economic development, it's good for not just the First Nation, it's good for the region, it's good for the province, it's good for the country. There's a cost to poverty that people don't realize. That's not active investment. Once a band, and it's not just Osoyoos doing this, there's a handful of bands in every province that can put up their hand and say, we're making millions of dollars, we're creating thousands of jobs. Every province should want every 630 First Nations to be successful. Because if they're not, it's a drain on the economy. It's an actual drain.
You mentioned John Lennon.
Favorite.
And the track is I Believe. It's about God.
The John Lennon track. And, you know, I don't know if there is a God. I always say maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But any religion, whether it's Christianity, First Nation religions, or Buddhism, Hinduism, whatever it may be, Muslims, as long as you're not getting too extreme in it and hurting people, believe what you want.
Sure.
But don't take religion and that's what residential school did to my people. That's why so many of my people have said they put us to our knees. They hit us over the head with that cross. And they have such a distaste. Many of my people, I'm not saying all, many of my people have such a distaste for religion, and because it was done that way to them.
Yep, the way it was done. I do know who I like a lot, Anna Mae Aquash, the Micmac leader. She talks about raggedy ass pilgrims. I love that. I'd love to meet her.
That was an awesome quote. You know, it only took a hand, which is true. I mean, if the natives were such savages, is George Washington and John A. Macdonald and the founding fathers of Canada and America said that Native people were savages. We could have easily killed all. You know, the 13 colonies would not have survived.
Yeah,
the French and English would not have survived in this country. How the hell did Lewis and Clark go across the West? If the Indians were savages, they'd have wiped them out as soon as they got in their territory, right?
Of course.
Nations were not savage people, but we weren't perfect either. We had our own intertribal wars. We did dumb shit to each other. We had dumb stuff we did. No society was perfect, but I love what Anna Mae Aquash said when she said it only took a handful of raggedy ass pilgrims to build one of the most powerful countries in the world.
Yeah.
And she said it'll only take a handful of raggedy ass Indians to get our pride and purpose back. And I want to be one of those raggedy ass Indians.
Chief Clarence Louie, I'll leave you with this. Wounded Knee, Little Bighorn, Crazy Horse, Sitting Bull. All of that history And you still say, damn, I'm lucky to be an Indian.
True that. You know, residential schools, land ripoffs, poverty, alcoholism, the highest suicide rates in this country still as we talk here today. The conditions of most reserves are in third world conditions with still unemployment rates that exceed the Great Depression. That means most First Nations in this country have been in a Great Depression. The Great Depression didn't end in the 1930s to most First Nations and two of the richest countries in the world, Canada and in the US. Most First Nations are still living under a Great Depression. And even with all that, even with all the bad stuff that's been done to us, every First Nation people I've met and every reserve I've been on, and I've been on over 300 of them, every one of them I'll still stand up and say, damn, I'm glad I was born an Indian or born First Nation. Damn, I'm glad that I was raised on this res, or some have left the reserves because there's no jobs there, but every First Nation I've run into still has that pride of ancestral self. We can't go anywhere in the world to learn our language or to be Scottish or to be French or to be English or to be Spanish. We only have our territory, our traditional territory that has been here for 10,000 years. And our ancestral, and the bones of our people are buried nowhere else, except for those that have gone off and defended this country in World War I and World War II or Vietnam, of which if people can realize that after all this had happened to us and the government did to us during World War I and World War II, no other race of people enlisted, volunteered at a higher percentage than the First Nations people. Yeah. That's a documented fact. Even though they weren't called citizens, even though they couldn't vote, they still put on that Canadian or American uniform and went and defended the principles of this country.
Chief Clarence Louie, can you find young people today who have that same heart, soul?
I always say that we have to get back to the hardworking in the work attitude of the elders. Yeah. On every res I've been on, and it's no different with non-Native people. When I was in Saskatchewan or Alberta, when I was going to school out there in Lethbridge, the hardest working people are still the people 60, 70 and older. Those that have the best yards, even though they might not have much, because they have pride of ownership. Yeah. They grew up learning the work, and we didn't have running water back then. We didn't have power. The younger people have to realize the benefits they have nowadays, that they can just flick a switch. The heat's there, the light's there. And the younger people, and when I listen to the Punjabi in our area, yeah, they work hard in those fields. But yet the younger people don't want to get their hands dirty. Yeah. We have to import Mexicans now in every one of our vineyards because the younger generations seem to have this high society or this attitude that
entitlement.
Entitlement. There it is right there. They don't want to sweat for a living. They don't want to work in those fields. The best training grounds I had, my res had, was we had to work in the vineyards. Yeah. No shade in 35-degree heat. We earned $2 a day, but that's just what we did because that's the way it was, and we grew up hardworking. And it just baffles me. It's this country. It needs to get back, and not just Native people, non-Native people as well. We got to get back to some old school ways, mentality, some old school lessons that our grandparents and our had. Work for a living. Don't take things for granted. Yep. Take any job you can get. Yep. That means flipping burgers, you go flip burgers. If it means working out in the fields, you go work out in those fields. Don't have that lazy ass attitude that everything has to be the head down generation where you can't even communicate anymore with your voice. Yep. Communicating with your fingers is not real communication. We should get back to some old school discipline as well. And in our schools, it baffled me. I actually presented in the high school not long ago, and I saw a trash can in the classroom. I asked the teacher, when the students, why is this trash can there? She said, well, that's where the kids throw their sunflower seeds. I said, they're allowed to eat sunflower seeds while they're in class? I thought, man, we're going too far. We're going too far soft. I mean, even in the high school now, they took out the grade system for athletes. If you were really good, you had the pass test to get gold shorts. If you were a bit better athlete, you got blue shorts. And they said, well, we took that all away because some parents complained about the self-esteem.
Yeah.
You're hurting the self-esteem of my child. There's a Chinese proverb that says, in a system where no one fails, no one succeeds.
Okay. I have one last question, and it goes like this. You say in the book, and you're quite emphatic about it, that res leaders read. They read. They do. We got to get them to read your book. If every white person out there reads the book, fine. We need to know this story. But more importantly, at least half of this book is directly written for res leaders, the future generations in reservations. How do you get them to read it?
Exactly, Terry. I mean, that was my first target audience was the First Nations crowd. No doubt about that. My second target audience was corporate Canada and corporate America, because that's who we have to develop a relationship with. We got to stop going to the federal government or the politicians with our hands out. We got to develop business relationship with corporate Canada and corporate America. The most successful tribes in the U.S. or bands in Canada all have that economic development focus and all have good business partnerships.
Yeah.
And then my third target audience was of course the federal and provincial government. But I've been in a lot of res houses, and it just I just feel sad that because if I'm in a successful person's office or house, first thing I look for is their bookcase. The very first thing. I don't care about their house or how fancy their house is. And I've done this many times, whether I'm in the PM's office, Premier's office. First thing I go to is their bookcase. And I don't ask. I just head right over there. And I do the Indian thing. I'm going to borrow one of their books because I want to know what this successful person reads. What have they been reading that got them to where they're at? And then I usually, like I did with the Premier or the PM, Chrétien, can you sign your book? I never give it back. It gets added to my book collection. I've heard one of the best quotes I've ever heard was that the two major influences in most successful people's lives are the people you meet and the books you read. The people you meet and the books you read. It saddens me that most Native houses I go in, there's no bookcase. They don't have a personal library. They have magazines, and usually it's the Inquirer or some dumb shit like that. And that's another reason for writing this book. I want my First Nations people, if this is going to be the only book or the first book that gets you reading, awesome. My mission's accomplished.
Yeah, man.
If I can get some young Native people to finally start their personal library with my book, because leaders in the contemporary context, leaders are readers, no doubt about that. Most successful people, this millionaire in Vancouver, he nominated me to the Canadian Business Hall of Fame. I was the first Native ever in the Canadian Business Hall of Fame. When I had a chance to meet Peter Brown in Vancouver, successful businessman, multimillionaire, met me at this restaurant, fancy restaurant. I picked him out. He was sitting by himself and he was reading a book. He's 70, 80, some odd years old. And as soon as I went up to him, I pulled out my cell phone. I said, Peter, which book you reading? He put it down. It was a book on leadership. I took a picture of it and I said, I don't have that book. I got lots of books on leadership. I don't have that one. And here I thought, here's a guy that's he's in overtime in his life, but he's still reading. He's still reading books on leadership. That's what everybody should be doing.
Some of us are still doing interviews.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Thank you, Terry. You've been awesome.
Thank you, man. Thank you for your time. I know your time is extremely valuable. And I love the wine. I love the wine. I love doing stories on the wine. I think your next potential leader is Justin Hall.
Exactly. Yeah,
I tried
he's
to.
our winemaker now. He's our winemaker.
He is, man. He's just got it. He's got that. He's got that Indian magic. That's what he's got.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, Terry. You're a legend.
Thank you, man. You've just spent over 45 minutes in the presence of a great leader, a natural leader, Chief Clarence Louie of the Osoyoos Indian Band, right on the border between the South Okanagan and Washington State. The book is called Res Rules, My Indictment of Canada's and America's Systematic Racism Against Indigenous Peoples. And it's bang on. Well done, Chief Clarence Louie. This is the Mulligan Stew Podcast. Please subscribe on Spotify, Google Play, Apple Podcasts. And by the way, please visit mulliganstew.ca for the full podcast on video and audio. Also, consider subscribing and giving us a thumbs up at Terry David Mulligan on YouTube. Now, coming up next week, Muriel Buckley. It will be our Mulligan Stew Podcast. Still to come, Lake Street Dive, Art Bergman, and a lot more. It's the Mulligan Stew Podcast. Have yourself a safe and great summer.